At 6:17 on a rainy Tuesday morning, Daniel Reed found an envelope containing $2,400 on a park bench. He was already late for work. His delivery van was parked across the street, the engine running, the windshield blurred with rain. Daniel stood beneath the shelter of a maple tree and looked down at the envelope. There was no name on it, no address, just money, a lot of it. For a few seconds, Daniel didn't move. Because $2,400 was more money than Daniel had in his checking account. And that was the first strange thing about what happened next. He didn't take it. He didn't even think about taking it. He simply picked up the envelope, looked around the empty park, and wondered who had lost it. What Daniel didn't know was that this was not the first time someone would call him foolish for returning money. And it wouldn't be the last. But that morning, before Daniel made the decision that would eventually change several lives, he remembered something his father had told him when he was a boy. A sentence Daniel had heard so many times that he could still hear his father's voice clearly. The real test of a man's character is what he does when nobody is watching. Daniel looked once more at the envelope. Then he picked it up and walked toward his van. Daniel Reed was 38 years old and worked 6 days a week delivering packages around the city. He wasn't poor enough to be desperate, but he wasn't comfortable enough to ignore money, either. The previous month, the refrigerator at home had broken. Then Elena's car needed repairs. Then the rent increased. One unexpected bill after another had slowly pushed their savings toward zero. Daniel had started taking extra delivery routes. Sometimes he ate lunch sitting inside his van because it was faster than stopping somewhere. Sometimes he came home after Elena had already gone to bed. He told himself it was temporary. Most people tell themselves that when life gets difficult. Daniel was trying to build a small safety net. And yet, on that rainy morning, he was holding $2,400 that could have paid several of his problems away. He could have told himself that whoever lost it probably wouldn't even know where it came from. He could have walked away. Instead, he drove to the nearest police station. The officer behind the desk counted the money twice, then looked at Daniel. "You're sure you want to turn this in?" Daniel nodded. The officer gave him a receipt. Daniel walked back into the ring. He didn't feel heroic. He felt slightly foolish. And for the rest of the day, he couldn't stop wondering whether he had just made the wrong decision. That night, Elena found Daniel sitting at the kitchen table. The receipt from the police station was beside his coffee. She picked it up. Then she looked at him. Daniel explained what happened. Elena listened quietly. Then she smiled. Not because they had money, because they didn't. She knew exactly how much $2,400 could have helped them. But she also knew Daniel. "You did the right thing," she said. Daniel looked toward the refrigerator. The broken appliance was still sitting in the corner of the kitchen. "I know," he said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. Elena placed the receipt back on the table. "Then why do you look like you lost something?" Daniel didn't answer. Because, in a strange way, he felt like he had. He had lost an opportunity. And sometimes doing the right thing doesn't immediately feel good. Sometimes it feels like giving something away and watching it disappear. The strange part was that Daniel had been returning lost money for years. Small amounts. A few dollars outside a grocery store. A wallet on a bus. Cash left behind at a cafe. He always returned it. But he had never thought much about why. Until the morning, he found $2,400. That was when the question finally became impossible to ignore. Why did Daniel keep doing it? When Daniel was 12, his father took him to a hardware store. Thomas Reed was a quiet man. He worked with his hands. He believed in fixing things instead of replacing them. That afternoon, Daniel found a $20 bill in the parking lot. He picked it up. His father saw it. Daniel expected him to smile. Instead, Thomas asked one question. "Did you lose it?" Daniel shook his head. Thomas held out his hand. Daniel gave him the money. They walked inside the store. His father handed the $20 to the cashier. "If someone comes looking for it," he said, "you'll know where it went." Daniel remembered being annoyed. $20 had seemed like a fortune, but his father had simply shrugged. Years later, Daniel would realize something. His father hadn't been teaching him what to do with money. He had been teaching him what kind of person to become. Years later, Daniel found a wallet on a city bus. Inside were 3 credit cards, a driver's license, and $86. The next morning, he tracked down the address. An elderly woman answered the door. It was Mrs. Clara Bennett. She looked at the wallet, then at Daniel. Then she held it against her chest. Daniel didn't know why she was so relieved, until she told him the wallet contained a photograph of her husband. He had died the previous winter. The photograph was the only copy she had. Daniel realized then that sometimes what people lose isn't what's written on a receipt. Sometimes it's something that can't be replaced. Clara thanked him. Daniel told her it was nothing. But as he walked away, he thought about how easily he could have kept the money and returned only the cards. Nobody would have known. Except Daniel. And apparently, that was enough. A few months later, Daniel found $60 beneath a table at a small coffee shop. He gave it to the cashier. A man at the next table overheard. "Man," he said, "you've got to be kidding." Daniel turned. The man laughed. "You actually returned it?" Daniel shrugged. The man shook his head. "People like you are the reason people like me stay broke." Daniel smiled politely. He didn't argue. But the comment stayed with him. Because there were days when Daniel wondered the same thing. Was honesty making his life harder? Would life be easier if he stopped worrying about what was right and simply looked after himself? He didn't have an answer. Then, 3 weeks later, Daniel found another envelope. And this time, the money inside was enough to change the question completely. It was a cold Thursday evening. Daniel was delivering a package to an apartment building. Near the entrance, he noticed a brown envelope tucked behind a flower pot. He picked it up. Inside was $800. There was also a handwritten note. Daniel read it. For Lily's school registration. He looked toward the apartment doors. Someone had left the money there intentionally. But the envelope had fallen. Daniel could have handed it to the building manager. Instead, he waited. 10 minutes. 20. Then he saw a man in a dark green work jacket rushing toward the entrance. Marcus Hill. Daniel recognized him. Marcus received packages at the building almost every week. Daniel watched him check his pockets. Then his backpack. Then the flower pot. Panic slowly appeared in his body language. Daniel stepped forward. Looking for this? Marcus froze. He looked at the envelope. Then at Daniel. For a moment, neither man moved. And Daniel saw something in Marcus's posture that made him understand. This wasn't just money. Someone was depending on it. Marcus took the envelope. His hands were shaking. Daniel didn't ask why. Marcus didn't explain. He simply said thank you. Then he turned toward the stairs. Daniel noticed a small purple backpack sitting beside the elevator. A little girl was waiting there. Lily, 11 years old. She was watching her brother. Not smiling. Not speaking. Just watching. Daniel realized something. Lily already knew there was a problem. Children often understand more than adults think. Marcus took the envelope and walked toward her. Daniel turned away. He didn't want to intrude. But before he left, he heard Lily ask one question. Did you find it? Marcus answered quietly. Yeah. And that was all Daniel heard. But the moment stayed with him. Because for the first time, returning money had felt different. This time, he knew exactly who needed it. And that made the decision feel heavier. The next day, Daniel told Elena about Marcus. She listened while preparing dinner. Then she asked him something unexpected. Did you ever wonder what would happen if you kept the money? Daniel looked at her. Of course. Elena paused. Then why don't you? Daniel thought about it. I don't know. But that wasn't true. He knew. He just had never put it into words. Because Daniel had spent years believing that honesty was simple. You find something. You return it. End of story. But life wasn't that simple. Sometimes the person who needed the money had a face. Sometimes you had bills waiting at home. Sometimes you knew nobody would ever find out. And sometimes the hardest decision was the one you had already made 100 times. 3 weeks later, Daniel's van broke down. The repair estimate was $1,900. Daniel stared at the number. His savings were gone. Elena's car still needed work. The rent was due in 9 days. Daniel sat alone in the repair shop parking lot. Rain tapped against the windshield. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something inside him crack. He didn't want to be the good man anymore. He wanted to be the man who got lucky. The man who found money and didn't have to give it back. The man who didn't always have to choose between doing what was right and protecting the people he loved. Then his phone rang. It was his supervisor. Daniel expected bad news. Instead, his supervisor offered him a temporary route managing deliveries for a larger area. More hours. More pay. Daniel accepted. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a rescue. It was simply a door opening. And Daniel walked through it. But he didn't know yet that someone else had been watching him. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began noticing something strange. Every time he stopped at the same neighborhood grocery store, an older woman seemed to be there. She never spoke to him. She simply watched. One afternoon, Daniel found a $10 bill near the checkout. He handed it to the cashier. When he turned around, the woman was gone. Daniel thought nothing of it. Until it happened again. A few days later, he returned a wallet. The same woman was standing across the street. And then, one morning, Daniel saw her outside his delivery route. Mrs. Clara Bennett, the elderly woman whose wallet he had returned years earlier. Daniel approached her. She smiled. "You remember me?" Daniel nodded. Clara looked toward the street. Then she said something that confused him. "You're still doing it." Daniel frowned. "Doing what?" Clara didn't answer. She simply walked away. That night, Daniel told Elena. She was sitting on the couch with a book. When he finished, she looked at him. "Maybe she knows something." "Like what?" Elena shrugged. "Maybe she knows why you keep doing this." Daniel laughed. "She barely knows me." Elena closed her book. "Maybe that's the point." Daniel didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, he found himself thinking about every dollar he had ever returned. The wallet, the coffee shop money, the envelopes, the cash, the forgotten phones, all those small moments, all those strangers. And then Daniel remembered something. Every person he had helped had disappeared from his life. Except Clara. And now she was back, which meant there was something he didn't know. Daniel found Clara at the small park near her apartment. She was sitting on a bench. The same kind of bench where Daniel had found the $2,400. Daniel sat beside her. He asked why she had been watching him. Clara looked down at her hands. Then she told him. Years earlier, when her husband was dying, she had lost her wallet. It contained the photograph. The money inside didn't matter. The photograph did. Daniel had returned it. But Clara had never forgotten him. After her husband died, she began volunteering at a local community center. And there, she started seeing people who had lost everything. Jobs, homes, family, confidence. She told Daniel something he never expected. Most people think kindness is about giving someone something. Daniel listened. Clara continued. Sometimes it's about reminding them that the world hasn't completely forgotten them. Daniel didn't answer, because suddenly, he remembered every person he had returned something to, and he wondered what happened to them after they walked away. A week later, Daniel received an envelope. It wasn't money. It was a handwritten note. There was no return address. The note said, "You don't know me, but I know what you did." Daniel read it twice. Then again. The writer explained that Daniel had once returned a wallet to someone at a bus station. That person had been the writer's father. The wallet contained money he needed for his daughter's medication. Daniel had forgotten the incident. The writer hadn't. Daniel sat at the kitchen table. Elena stood behind him. Neither spoke. Then Daniel noticed something. The letter had been mailed from the same neighborhood where Marcus lived. Daniel's heart tightened, because suddenly, he remembered Marcus. The envelope, Lily, the school registration. And one question entered his mind. Was it possible that these moments weren't as disconnected as he thought? Daniel began asking careful questions. Not because he wanted recognition, because he wanted to understand. Clara helped him. She knew people from the community center. And slowly, a pattern appeared. Some of the people Daniel had helped had later helped someone else. The man whose wallet Daniel returned had donated clothes to a shelter. The woman who recovered her husband's photograph had started delivering meals to elderly neighbors. The person who lost money at the coffee shop had later paid for a stranger's groceries. Daniel realized something that made him uncomfortable. He had spent years thinking his actions ended when he handed something back. They didn't. They continued. Quietly. Through people he never met. But there was still one mystery. Marcus. Why had the envelope been there? And why did Clara seem to know him? Daniel eventually learned the truth. Marcus wasn't saving money for school registration. Not exactly. The $800 was for something else. Lily had been accepted into a special educational program. The registration fee was only part of the cost. Marcus had been working extra shifts to cover the rest. Their mother had left years earlier. Their father was gone. Marcus had become Lily's legal guardian. He was 29 years old, and he was terrified. Terrified that one unexpected bill could take away the opportunity his sister had worked so hard for. Daniel understood immediately. Marcus hadn't told anyone. Because pride can make people hide their problems until the problems become impossible to hide. And Daniel realized something else. The person who had lost the $800 wasn't Marcus. It was someone else who had been helping him. Someone who had trusted him. Someone Daniel had never met. Daniel finally discovered who had left the envelope. It was Clara. She had been quietly helping Marcus through the community center. But she didn't have enough money to cover everything. So she had asked several people to contribute. The envelope was the result. Clara had accidentally left it near the flower pot. Daniel stared at her. Why didn't you tell me? Clara smiled. Would you have done something differently? Daniel thought about it. No, he wouldn't. Clara nodded. Then you didn't need to know. That answer stayed with Daniel. Because he finally understood. The story was never about the money. It was about trust. Clara had trusted Marcus. Marcus had trusted Clara. And Daniel had returned the envelope because he trusted something he couldn't prove. That doing the right thing still mattered, even when nobody was watching. Then something happened Daniel never expected. A month later, Daniel found another envelope. This one was on the floor of a grocery store. Inside was $500. There was a name, an address, and a phone number. Daniel called. The owner arrived 20 minutes later. He was a tired-looking man. He thanked Daniel. Then he asked him something. Why do you always return it? Daniel almost laughed. Because nobody had ever asked him that directly. He thought about his father, his mother, Elena, Clara, Marcus, Lily, all the people connected by moments that seemed insignificant. Then Daniel answered, because I know what it feels like to lose something. The man looked at him. Daniel continued, and I don't want to be the reason someone loses it forever. For the first time, Daniel realized that was the real answer. 6 months later, Daniel's financial situation finally improved. His temporary route became permanent. He paid off the repair bill. Elena's car was fixed. They rebuilt their savings slowly. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden fortune. No lottery ticket. Just work, time, patience, and a few good decisions. One evening, Daniel came home and found a letter on the kitchen table. It was from Lily. Her educational program had accepted her. She had written the letter herself. The handwriting was uneven, but the message was simple. Thank you for returning the money. Daniel smiled. Then he read the next line. My brother says you didn't have to do that. The final sentence made him stop. But I'm glad you did. Daniel folded the letter carefully and put it inside his worn brown wallet. Years earlier, Daniel had thought honesty was about rules. Don't steal. Don't lie. Return what isn't yours. But life had taught him something more complicated. Character wasn't about following rules when they were easy. It was about making the same decision when you were tired, when you were broke, when nobody was looking, when keeping the money would have solved your own problems, and when you could convince yourself that nobody would ever know. Daniel had learned that doing the right thing didn't guarantee an easy life. It didn't make him rich. It didn't protect him from bad luck. But it gave him something else. The ability to look at himself honestly. And sometimes, that is worth more than money. 1 year after finding the $2,400, Daniel returned to the same park. It was early morning. The rain had stopped. The bench was still there. Daniel stood in front of it for a moment. Then he noticed something. A small envelope, sitting exactly where the first one had been. Daniel stared at it. For a second, he almost smiled. Then he looked around. Nobody was watching. Not Clara. Not Elena. Not Marcus. Nobody. Daniel picked up the envelope. Inside was a single dollar. And a note. For the next person who needs it. Daniel stood completely still. Then he understood. Someone had been watching after all. Not him. The world. People notice more than we think. Kindness travels farther than we can see. And sometimes, the smallest decisions become stories that continue long after we have forgotten them. Daniel folded the note. He left the dollar on the bench. Then he walked away. Years later, Daniel would sometimes tell his children about his father. He would tell them about the hardware store, the $20 bill, and the lesson he had once thought was too simple to matter. But now Daniel understood. The world would give them plenty of reasons to become cynical. People would disappoint them. Plans would fail. Money would disappear. Good people would sometimes struggle. And doing the right thing wouldn't always be rewarded. But that didn't make it meaningless. Because a person's character isn't built in the moments when everyone is watching. It's built quietly. In parking lots. On buses. At grocery stores. In empty apartments. On rainy mornings. In all those small moments when you have a choice. Nobody may ever know what you chose. But you will. And sometimes, that's the person you have to live with most. A few minutes after Daniel left the park, a young woman walked past the bench. She was carrying a grocery bag. She looked tired. She stopped. She saw the dollar. Then the note. She picked it up. She read it. And for a moment, she simply stood there. Then she smiled. Not because $1 could solve her problems. It couldn't. But because someone had thought about a stranger. Someone who might need a little help. Someone who might be having a difficult morning. Someone who might be wondering if the world still cared. She placed the dollar carefully inside her wallet and continued walking. Daniel never knew. He never saw her. He never learned her name. And maybe that's the point. The best things we do in life are often the things we never get to see the results of. Daniel spent years returning money. But in the end, the money was never the most important thing. The real thing he returned was something much harder to measure. Trust. A little faith in people. A reminder that not everyone will take advantage of you. That not every stranger is dangerous. That kindness doesn't always need an audience. And perhaps the most important lesson of all is this. You may never know how far one good decision travels. You may return a wallet and forget about it. You may hold a door open. You may answer a phone call. You may give someone a second chance. And years later, somewhere you will never see, that moment may still be alive, moving quietly from one person to another, like a message passed between strangers. Daniel's life never became extraordinary, and that was what made it meaningful. He still worked, still worried about bills, still had bad days, still made mistakes, but he had learned something his father had tried to teach him all those years ago. The real test of character isn't what you do when everyone is watching. It's what you do when nobody is. And sometimes, the person who benefits from your decision won't even know your name. But somewhere, someone will remember. Someone will believe a little more in people. Someone will choose kindness because you chose it first. And maybe that's how good things survive. Not through grand gestures, not through applause, but through ordinary people making quiet decisions that nobody sees. Daniel Reed simply happened to be one of them. And on a rainy Tuesday morning, with $2,400 sitting in his hands, he had made one such decision. He returned it. And in doing so, he never realized how many lives that one decision would eventually touch. Because sometimes, the money you return isn't what you lose. Sometimes, it's the kind of person you become that makes everything worth it.